To understand the story that we're about to tell, we'll need to head over to the fictional place of Empire City. An organized band of crooks under the payroll of Big Boss causes problems for the city, and they naturally find themselves at odds with Bulletproof and his central organization of police specialists, or simply shortened to the acronym C.O.P.S. Through 65 episodes, 2 waves worth of toys, and a short comic run by DC Comics all starting in 1988, we'd watch our heroes as they'd be fighting crime in a future time. With a fun cap-firing gimmick introduced to the toy line, catchy series music by the famous duo of Haim Saban and Shuki Levy, as well as a colorful, dynamic cast of heroes and villains, C.O.P.S. is exactly the type of fun Saturday morning cartoon franchise that signifies the bygone, blissful age of growing up during the 1980s. And we can take the time capsule back right now and revisit the history of C.O.P.S. So stay tuned, because it's crime fighting time.
It's crime fighting time.
So the toy industry in 1988 was a very competitive place to be. I mean, there were so many companies that were coming and they were going, and there were so many ideas that were flowing around the place. And a lot of companies, in my honest opinion, were throwing everything everywhere. We had everything from dinosaurs with laser guns fighting reptilian aliens on one side. We had a very staunch, rugged military on the other side, and everything in between. So really and truly, it was a no-holds-barred, anything-goes sort of atmosphere in 1988. And it would only kind of ramp up from there, because in the 90s, of course, things went full crazy. One of the main heads behind one of the most prominent toy lines in the day was, of course, Larry Hama. And Larry Hama, of course, aside from being the mastermind behind, a fantastic toy line like Bucky O'Hare, he also was very integral in C.O.P.S, which is what we're talking about today. He wrote a lot of the file cards, in addition to which, given that his talent as a writer and an actor, he put a lot of emotion and a lot of character into each of these things. And as you watch the show, of course, you can see each of these displayed, and it gave C.O.P.S a very unique feel.
And expanding on that feel would be the toys themselves. At the time of the initial release, Hasbro was trying to find the next big thing to follow up on G.I. Joe and the Transformers. They had tried in 1986 with the monster-themed Inhumanoids, and again in 1987 with the magic and hologram-driven Visionaries, though both lines came up short in terms of living up to what was hoped for. C.O.P.S succeeded to a greater degree in 1988, having more episodes worth of animation and a broader range of toys than either Inhumanoids or Visionaries, but still couldn't reach the heights of G.I. Joe nor the Transformers. The 1988 toy line was actually marketed as C.O.P.S and Crooks, and were constructed with an O-ring center point to hold the body together, much like G.I. Joe before it, albeit they made these figures larger than the traditional 3 3/4 inch Joes. That and the toys were packed with paper firing caps for which you could put into the weapons and pull a mechanism on a figure's weapon to create the sound effects and blast effects you needed for your playtime adventures. And the way the figures themselves looked was part of the charm when it came to collecting them.
Well, one of the main things that stood out for C.O.P.S and made it unique was the design choices. The design choices versus everybody else was very underplayed. A lot of the police uniforms kind of resembled real police uniforms. I could buy that costume right now just going to a store.
With the various C.O.P.S characters coming from different law enforcement units, the federal agent Bulletproof, also known as Baldwin P. Vess, was the leader of this elite C.O.P.S unit and had a cybernetic torso that he got after suffering a major injury during a battle with the Crooks, and his torso could literally withstand bullets, hence his codename. Such a concept was brought into a toy line at the right time, seeing as the RoboCop movie debuted the previous year in 1987. Despite being set in what was then considered a future time, some of the attire choices were a callback to the past. For example, the old-school beat cop look uniform of Longarm had fans of the franchise easily gravitate towards him, and so did the extending power cuffs he had on one arm. He used these power cups to quite literally capture villains from a distance, and the cartoon also expanded on his character quite a bit.
But above that, he actually had a family, and they had a starring role in the cartoon. You actually got to see his family. His family was in danger. You saw him as a father figure and a role model, not only as a police officer.
While Bulletproof and Longarm would form part of that first wave of single-carded figures, you also had the canine specialist, Bowser, and his robot dog, Blitz, and they are a pair of whom are considered favorites for many who love the Cops and Crooks franchise. There was also Barricade, who came with some riot gear and was utilized for crowd control work. Here's Sundown from Texas, who had a cowboy-style look and naturally carried a pair of shooters, though in the cartoon he also had a more standard police uniform that he could rotate in and out of. Sergeant Mace, or simply Mace as he was called in the cartoon, came from a SWAT team background and was a powerhouse of a man who carried a large laser bazooka on missions. While he's usually a no-nonsense type while he's on the job, it was interesting to see him have something of a romantic relationship with the female crook, Nightshade. Though G.I. Joe had done this sort of thing previously when their tech specialist Mainframe had a relationship with the Cobra Dreadnought, Zorana. Though, curiously, the name Mainframe would be reused for Cops as well, albeit that character wouldn't have her own toy. The team's patrol officer went by the name of Highway, and he rounds out the Wave 1 single-carded assortment for the heroes. He's another who's heavily featured in the cartoon, albeit usually riding a motorcycle, but this toy came packed in with a jet pod of sorts, so in any case, it's still neat to see a small vehicle included as part of a single packed figure offering. We will get to the full-sized vehicle shortly, but for now it's important to discuss the individually carded villains that were included in this opening 1988 wave. Big Boss was Empire City's crime lord and controlled the money supply for the group of crooks in his employ. He's also got a cybernetic left hand and is often seen with his pet weasel known as Scratch. His outward appearance is supposed to mimic that of a mafia kingpin of sorts, and like a typical mafia boss, he'd leave the actual working tasks to his underlings. Among those underlings, Berserko was the nephew of Big Boss and was one of the main villains in the Cops and Crooks franchise. He tended to be a bit clumsy at times, but that didn't stop the boss from sending him on missions. He was often paired up with Rock Crusher, who always carried a bunch of gear where he went, such as the jackhammer he would use to break his way into things. Dr. Bad Vibes was the mad scientist of the group, often inventing things to help with the Big Boss's schemes. And while most of the outfits and appearances for the characters were relatively normal compared to other toy lines at the time, Dr. Bad Vibes did have a dome on his head for his outlandishly large brain, making him one of the stranger characters in the series. He was often partnered with his robot, Buzz Bomb. And rounding out the single-carded figures of Wave 1 was the Crooks Enforcer, who was a noteworthy standout among the gangster-type characters that we got to see in the toy line.
Buttons McBoom Boom was my favorite male character. Not because his outfit stood out, because Big Boss himself also had that kind of early 10s or 20s kind of gangster outfit, but he, amongst the rest of the crooks, was also very much a straight shooter. He didn't tell many jokes, he was very cruel, he was sadistic almost, and he seemed like a professional thug, a professional criminal. I think he was actually Big Boss's bodyguard because he was so serious. Also, that kind of fold-out chest feature with the machine gun, who can go wrong with that?
Fortunately, Cops did get to see a second wave later in 1988 before the line was cancelled. For the heroes, Apes represents the automated police enforcement systems with his advanced equipment. Airwave is the team's communication specialist. Inferno is naturally a firefighter and reuses a Hasbro name from the Transformers Autobot of 1985. Taser is the Cops' non-lethal detainment specialist, and Powder Keg would be the team's bomb squad specialist. Nightstick here is a martial arts specialist, and Checkpoint rounds out the Cop ranks for Wave 2 as an MP or a military police. With the aforementioned Larry Hama writing up the file cards for both G.I. Joe and Cops, Checkpoint has the same first and last name as G.I. Joe's Beachhead. Namely, they both go by the name of Wayne Sneeden, and Checkpoint's file card does state that his father served with an anti-terrorist unit during the 80s and 90s, so that's a neat connection between the two franchises. While the 1988 C.O.P.S Checkpoint figure is out of scale with the vintage 1986 G.I. Joe Beachhead, Checkpoint does scale reasonably well with the G.I. Joe classified version of Beachhead should one choose to display father and son this way. As for the second wave of Crooks, Louie the Plumber is their handyman, Bullet is identified as a munitions fanatic, Cuckoo specializes as a time bomb expert, Nightmare is identified as an attack android, and the Crooks are rounded out here with Hyena, known for being a criminal mastermind. Now that we've discussed all the figures, we can get to the vehicles, and we may as well begin with the large air raid copter, which had 2 cockpits and was featured heavily in the cartoon. It was piloted by Bullseye, though you could easily put another C.O.P.S character into the other seat. The air raid was also the name of one of the 1986 Transformers aerial bots. The Ironsides was a ground attack armored vehicle, and it came packed in with the young officer known as Hardtop. The Bluestreak is a motorcycle that also comes with a sidecar and reuses the name from the 1984 Transformers Bluestreak character. The heroic vehicle ranks could further be expanded with the armored tactical assault car that came with its driver, Heavyweight. The Highway Interceptor here was included with the driver Roadblock, who takes his name from the existing G.I. Joe character, and for further air missions, you also had the C.O.P.S Pursuit Jet. Now I'll point out that we can't list every name reused from previous franchises, so only a few examples were given. And also, Hasbro would continue to reuse C.O.P.S character names even after the franchise ended. The Crooks vehicles included the Roadster with turbo two-tone, and he was the usual Crooks getaway driver and one of the main thugs that was featured in the cartoon series. And the other Crooks vehicles included the Dragster, as well as the Jailbird Airspeeder. Unfortunately, the toy line never included female characters. That said, it would have been nice to see some of them, such as the undercover cop Mirage, who was also sometimes seen co-piloting the air raid helicopter, or the tech specialist Mainframe. You also had the more brutish thug in Misdemeanor, and the jewel thief in Nightshade. Other characters that we wouldn't see in toy form included Commissioner Highwater, as well as the Big Boss's assistant, Squeaky Clean. And some of these characters that we didn't see in the toy line do remain fan favorites to this day, despite their inclusion being only in media form. Case in point, Hans can tell you that his list of favorites changes a little bit when you consider the additional characters from the animated series.
On the C.O.P.S side, it was very easy, like Mainframe. Lovely. You know what I mean? She's blonde, she's attractive, she's spiky, she's a little bit feisty. And she had one episode that really stand out with her where the Crooks were hijacking a rocket ship, and she had a standout part in that. And even now it kind of stuck out. She was fighting 2 animated astronaut suits, and I was like, that kind of creeped me out as a kid, so that always stuck with me because that took real courage from a character. But Nightshade, on the other hand, she was different. But I'm also the sucker for that kind of curvy, waif-like live cat burglar character. It's the same reason I like Black Cat from Spider-Man. So Nightshade was that. Also, you add in a troubled romance with Mace on the cop side. Easy shoo-in. Easy shoo-in for favorite female character. For me.
And while we have been discussing the cartoon in a piecemeal manner thus far, it's still important to consider the lasting impression it left as a whole, especially when looking at the rest of the industry around it at the time.
C.O.P.S cartoon series was unique amongst its peers for the same reason why G.I. Joe was unique, why everyone else was focusing on superheroes and mutants and all these sort of things. C.O.P.S was very much this organization based on real-life police work. So much so that at the start of every episode, it started with the case of, and then they put the title of the episode.
The case of C.O.P.S File 1.
Also, you followed around people who you could almost meet on the beat. You had your Officer O'Malley's and your Bullet P Vest and stuff, and these were real titles of real people you could meet.
And of note, that realistic sentiment was not unique to just the heroes, but for our villains as well.
They were called crooks. They were criminals. They were actually bad guys. No two ways about that. There was no gray area in them. And if there was a gray area, it was almost episodic. And that made C.O.P.S fantastic because it gave children the opportunity to focus on real life, well, fantastically based real life. law enforcement, as opposed to, you know, the mythical realm of Eternia, or, you know, the mutants era with regards to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Indeed, the Crooks had very few exceptions when it came to criminal activities, one rare example being the episode titled The Case of the Lowest Crime, when Big Boss and his thugs helped the cops stop a drug dealer from doing his drug business on the streets. Though this could have been a callback to the 1972 Godfather movie when Don Vito Corleone, a mafia boss played by Marlon Brando, declined to invest into a narcotics business due to the dangers involved. It's also worth pointing out that Hasbro had switched over to hiring DiC as its animation production company for shows like C.O.P.S. instead of hiring the entertainment group Sunbow like it had in the past with Transformers, G.I. Joe: A Real American Hero, and Jem and the Holograms, among others. DiC, of course, had an existing pedigree with animation, having produced cartoons for series such as Inspector Gadget, The Real Ghostbusters, and Mask. For all the things C.O.P.S did right, it's very much a product of its time in that the franchise still leaves something to be desired. Fans still want to see more modernized product releases, which is a testament to the long-term effects of the brand.
So the legacy of C.O.P.S kind of links itself very well to a lot of the legacy toy lines. There's a lot of unfinished business, a lot of characters that weren't released, a lot of stories that have yet to be told. And we as collectors have always wanted to kind of fill that hole that was left by the media houses and big companies of the day. So much so, I mean, we have Fresh Monkey Fiction and Chicken Fried Toys that are kind of filling that gap. I'm probably going to be leaping into that. I might not get the whole line, but as soon as they drop my favorite characters, sure, I'll be picking them up, especially at the 1/18 scale. So that's that legacy it holds. That and the theme song, that has stuck in my head forever.
The C.O.P.S line is always a fun one to go back and revisit, and it shouldn't be understated that DC Comics' 15-issue run did last longer than the prior attempt by Star Comics to do Visionaries, even if the run for both lines could have been longer under more ideal circumstances. The vintage C.O.P.S toys also at times differed in cosmetic or coloring, appearances from their animation models, so that's another tidbit of information that sometimes gets overlooked. Additionally, for the cartoon, C.O.P.S also re-aired under the name Cyber C.O.P.S during its 1990s reruns to differentiate it from the live-action reality-based TV show of the same name. The C.O.P.S line of toys and its cartoon had the distinction of being part of our pop culture memories in 1988, during a time when home console video gaming was becoming more commonplace. And while it probably took a backseat to the rising Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise of 1988, it's still noteworthy to look back at this year as a whole in terms of entertainment, as C.O.P.S was a part of this. And like any year during the 80s, this particular annual cycle had its own share of popular music, highly praised television program debuts, and time-tested movies you'd rewatch over and over again. In the end, while C.O.P.S is remembered fondly by its long-term fans and did have a decent run, it still felt like there was a level of untapped potential for a brand that had all the elements to take it to the next level, but didn't quite get there. That said, none of this takes away from the amazingness of reminiscing about the brand today and hope that it still has the ability to reach new audiences as a legacy franchise. And if you happen to like this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I'm gonna put another toy history that you can click on right over here, or for a look at my personal toy collection, you can click on this video right over here. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Case closed.
Case closed.